Hello, everyone, and welcome to OurCFL for January 2022. I'm your host, Joshway. Got a jam-packed show for you today. Two special guests. The first one is going to be Paul Woods. He's a published CFL author and a historian, going over his book, Year of the Rocket. If you haven't picked this up at your local bookstore, I highly recommend you pick it up. Then right after him, we'll have Adam Gosse. He's the Argos PA announcer. He does all the announcements at BMO Field during Argo games. And then we will do the prize draw for this retro throwback 2013 jersey. Medium, never been worn. We'll do that a little later in the show. But before we get into that, let's have a quick look back for January 2022, the top 10 stories according to Reddit. Right, our first guest on OurCFL today is a published CFL author. He's a historian, and he's got a new book out called Year of the Rocket that chronicles the 1991 Toronto Argonaut season. It is a phenomenal book, and we have the author with us today. Paul Woods, how are you doing?
Oh, great. Thanks for having me.
Well, thanks for coming on. I've wanted to talk to you for a long time because you're a lifelong Argo fan. I'm a lifelong Argo fan. You're a history guy. I'm a history guy. And I feel like we've lived two different Argo experiences completely. You see, I was born in 1992, right after this phenomenal masterpiece of a season. And my dad's a lifelong Argo fan too. He always talks about that year. And I missed it. I missed the proverbial boat.
I'm sorry that you missed it, but you've obviously had some good stuff since then, and it's I thank you and salute you for being an Argo fan. We need more of us, right? But yeah, it was an amazing time, and of course I had years and years of being a fan before that led up to it, and of course since then as well. So, but as I say, you know, if I was able to convey some of what happened in '91 and '92, the year you were born, in the book, then you'll get caught up on the story a little bit, I guess, right?
Now, it's a phenomenal story. Not just a CFL football story, but it's a phenomenal sports story in general. You have what is essentially Hollywood comes to Canada, the big star power, the big money, everything.
Yeah, it's a football story. It's a sports story. It's a culture story. It's an entertainment story. It's a business story. It's a nationalistic story in some ways. The idea that of Canada sort of actually, you know, beating the U.S. at their own game in a way. So yeah, I add it all up. It was a hell of a story. It was definitely worth telling. I felt for a long time that you know what I've said many times is that the Argonauts have been around. They've been playing football under that name. I believe this coming year is the 150th year of a football played under the name Argonauts. And they've had lots of great teams and lots of interesting things happened over the years, but there's never been a year like 1991. It was just an unbelievable ride. So many things combined to make it a massive story that went far beyond football, although the football side of it is pretty interesting too, obviously.
Yes, and I found it very fascinating also because I saw a lot of similarities to now. You mentioned at the start of the book that was a precarious time for the CFL. It was not in a great spot, and they really needed a shot in the arm to really revitalize everything. And I've been seeing a lot of that recently too. And I don't know, I want to know what are the similarities to now and then and the differences?
Well, there are some of both. I mean, the league, I would say the league is probably in some ways in a less precarious situation than it was back in 1991, because there are some thriving franchises now, and I mean there were then too. I mean the Edmonton Eskimos were they were then called the Eskimos, were a pretty thriving franchise back then. The Argonauts were healthier. They were much healthier than they are now in terms of gate attendance. They were still paying money into the league's equalization fund, which of course now it doesn't exist, although there's been talk that they're going to revive it, and the Argos that would be receiving some money from it. It's almost like it's flipped. It was the small franchises were struggling back then, and the big franchises were doing pretty well. Although it must be noted, the Montreal Alouettes had folded in 1987. So that was, the 80s were a really interesting time for the CFL. It was, in some ways, the peak of the league's popularity would be probably 83. That was the year the Argos broke the 31-year Grey Cup drought and won. That was the year BC Place Stadium opened, and they were putting 60,000 people a game into that building. It was the year that the Argos, or sorry, that the CFL signed the biggest TV contract it ever had, and still the biggest. I mean, it was $33 million over 3 years from Carling O'Keefe, the brewery, which translates to a lot more than they're currently receiving. And you add that all up, it was a huge success at the time, and then it started to slope downward. I mean, 80, 85, the Calgary Stampeders came close to folding. There was a Save Our Stamps campaign to save the franchise. In 86, 87, the Saskatchewan Roughriders had to hold telethons to just generate enough revenue to stay alive. 87, the Alouettes folded right the night before the season was supposed to start. They suddenly went out of business, and it caused a huge disruption to the schedule, caused the Winnipeg Blue Bombers to be moved into the Eastern Conference and so on. The Hamilton Tiger Cats were owned at the time by David Braley, who desperately wanted a buyer. This is by 91 now I'm talking about. They were putting 11,000 people a game into Ivor Wynne Stadium, and it was not going in the right direction. The Ottawa Roughriders, one of the crazy ironies of the 91 season, when Hollywood came to Canada with all the money and the hype, and John Candy, Bruce McNall, Wayne Gretzky, the Rocket, all that stuff was happening. The Argos played their first game that year in Ottawa, and 4 weeks later, the Ottawa Roughriders went bankrupt. It's often forgotten that there were teams were teetering on the brink of collapse, even while McNall and those guys were in here trying to make the CFL into a much bigger thing than it had been. So that's what it was like then. I mean, now you've got the very strong franchises in the Prairie provinces, particularly Saskatchewan and Winnipeg. They're the two most successful financially, most stable franchises, and just the big cities that are suffering. It's Toronto, Montreal, and Vancouver, where there have been a lot of questions about the viability of Canadian football going forward. And Hamilton, again, in an opposite sense of opposites. In 1991, they were 11,000 people and nobody wanted to go, and the owner couldn't even unload the team. Now they're pretty much selling out their new stadium, which is a good new stadium. Not that new anymore. It's 8 years old now, but it's much better than Ivor Wynne ever was. And they just got an big investment from Stelco. So they're a going concern in Hamilton. Ottawa, which went bankrupt in 91, is now a pretty thriving franchise, although they had some struggles at the gate this past year. Some of it was due to the fact that the team was terrible and COVID didn't help, obviously. I think they've got a pretty entrenched fan base in Ottawa. Whereas in 1991, I mean, if you'd asked who were the stronger franchises in the CFL, you probably would have said Vancouver, BC, Toronto, Edmonton. This past year, they might have been the three weakest franchises.
Yeah, it's funny how quickly we forget, right? And how things can flip flop so quickly, because it's only been 30 short years since pretty much the telethons and all this instability. And I agree with you in that it seems more stable now. Like, I don't think anybody's just going to completely disappear into the night as the Alouettes did back in the late 80s. Yeah, I see still some concerning spots. Now, what's interesting is, again, sort of the parallels to then and now. You see a lot of people talk about like player salaries and maybe bringing back a marquee player rule to get maybe a Rocket Ishmael up here. But as you sort of mentioned, it's almost like the Argonauts were the unique scenario there. Everybody else was kind of struggling. They kind of put all the pieces together for that one moment. And that's the other thing. It's a very brief moment of spectacular, amazing stuff, and then it's all kind of gone.
Well, it certainly was brief. I mean, it was the 1 year, and then it all fell apart in '92. Interestingly, I mean, the Rocket signing, it was an outlandish amount of money. They paid him more than any football player had ever been paid anywhere. You couldn't, if somebody thought, let's replicate that now, you couldn't actually replicate it exactly, because you'd have to pay, it would be a case of paying Trevor Lawrence $60 million a season, for example, because to make more than anybody, I mean, Mahomes is making 50, right? So, And the other thing is, though, that it did spark a little bit of a spending spree elsewhere. The Argos signed the Rocket in '91. They called it a marquee player, and he was sort of exempted from the salary cap. And then the next year, the league decided we got to fight fire with fire. We all want a marquee player. But Toronto was allowed to have two marquee players. Interestingly enough, they didn't end up getting a second one in '92, but they would have been able to had they signed a big name in '92. It would have been exempt from the salary cap. But the Calgary Stampeders went out and stole Doug Flutie away from the BC Lions and paid him a lot of money. They paid him about $1 million a season, which was crazy money when a salary cap was $3 million for the whole team. And then what you ended up is that every team's quarterback was designated as a marquee player, and they all started making too much money for the league to actually afford. So it triggered some spending that didn't really help. But as you said earlier, I mean, it was a very short thing. The Rocket was here in '91. The magic happened. Hollywood came. They got the Hollywood ending that they wanted in the script by winning the Grey Cup and that amazing touchdown by Rocket and Matt Dunnigan's heroic performance playing with a broken collarbone. Actually fractured clavicle. I always say it wrong. But then '92, the team was lousy. Rocket wanted out. The owners wanted him out because he wasn't earning his money off the field. By '93, they're into expansion into the U.S., and that became a bit of I believe, a saving grace for the league in some ways, even though it's generally perceived to have been a failed experiment, because the American teams only lasted 3 years and then they all left. But it bought the league time and brought in some cash when they needed it. That's a whole other story that we can talk about if you'd like. I didn't mean to sort of sidetrack it there, but I'm trying to sort of put it into perspective of how the trajectory of the story, basically.
Yeah, I guess what I would ask you now, in response to that, is, in a sense, then, was it a good thing that the Argos did this in 1991, or did it sort of create an unrealistic spending spree or set the bar a little too high for a lot of these teams, and now we kind of can't live up to that?
I believe in, from a historical standpoint, and I am sort of an Argo historian, I believe it was a move that ultimately indirectly helped save Canadian Football League. I think they needed to be jazzed up in the big market because interest was dwindling in Toronto, and it did boost interest, at least for that year, and it carried over a little bit beyond that, but it was mostly that year of '91, and it did lead, though, to expansion. And I truly believe that without expansion, I don't think the CFL would have survived, wouldn't come out of the 1990s. I mean, they were on the brink, actually, even after expansion was over. When the American teams all folded their tents and we went back to a Canada-only league in 1996, and Montreal came back into the picture, the league was out of money. But it's a well-known story that at the end of that 1996 season, they had to go to Tim Hortons, the donut coffee maker, and get cash to pay the players who were playing in the Grey Cup game their Grey Cup money. They had to give away tickets or sell tickets very cheap to Tim Hortons people in Hamilton, Tim Hortons customers. The league was on the brink of disaster, and I think it probably would have folded even before '96 had there not been an influx of money from the U.S. teams. They didn't all pay all the money they were supposed to, but some of them did pony up millions of dollars, a few $1 million at least, and that helped. And it bought some time, and it bought a chance for the league to kind of figure out how do we get onto a better financial footing. When the McNall Group left in '94, the Argos were taken over by the John Labatt Corporation, the brewery, which at the time owned TSN, and later it became part of the Interbrew conglomerate that owned the Blue Jays as well. Again, a stable, rich owner bought some time for Toronto to survive. They've had some dodgy ownership since then, particularly right after Interbrew sold it to Sherwood Shores. That was a bit of a disaster. But I think a case can be made, and I think it's a good case, that expansion saved the CFL, and expansion doesn't happen without the McNall Group pushing it.
That was always my understanding of the U.S. expansion too, is as disgraceful as it may have been for some purists, The expansion fees did buy us time and gave us money, gave the league direct money in a time where they desperately needed it. And even if they were playing in ridiculous places that didn't have proper fields and facilities.
Yeah, there were a lot of things that were bad about that thing. Of course, there's the famous, mangled version of Old Canada done in Las Vegas, and the team practicing in a parking lot at the casino, and fields that are the wrong size and all that stuff. And as soon as September arrived, interest waned in Birmingham and Memphis because it's college football time, right? So there were problems with it. But it was a bridge to where we are now in some ways. I mean, it wasn't the only bridge, and it's not the only reason Canadian Football League is still alive. But I think a really strong case could be made that without it, the Canadian Football League would not have been alive by the turn of the century.
I tend to agree. Now, I want to shift again to now and sort of the parallels. I talked a little earlier about how we're sort of hitting rocky road again with the league. And because of this sort of volatile period, we saw sort of collaboration with the XFL and talk of another Hollywood superstar coming in. What did you sort of make of all that? And did you see any sort of parallels there?
Well, yeah, I mean, in the sense that parallel in the sense that I think it was perceived potentially as a lifeline, particularly by the Argonaut ownership, by MLSE. I mean, I have no inside knowledge about this, but I strongly believe that MLSE was the most strongly in favor of looking at an XFL collaboration. And honestly, I personally was in favor of it. I'm very worried about how long we're going to have the Toronto Argonauts playing in the Canadian Football League. The trends are just not going in the right direction. Moving into BMO, which I truly do believe is a fantastic facility for football. Anybody watching this that hasn't been to a game at BMO Field, you are missing out. It's a fantastic place to watch a game. It's intimate. It has great sight lines. It's even when the crowd is not that big, and they're usually not that big. It's loud. It's rocking. It's a fun 3 hours. And I thought that would really help getting out of that awful facility they were in before. I still call it Sky Dome. Of course, it's the Rogers Center. And so it didn't work though. I mean, they haven't been able to put enough people into those seats. MLSE has lost money on this venture clearly. Hopefully they're philanthropic enough to want to keep doing that for a while, but I don't think it can go on forever. I believe MLSE is not in the business of turning a profit on its operations. They're in the business of building the value of their enterprises. And if you look at what Forbes magazine says about the value of the Toronto Maple Leafs and the Toronto Raptors and Toronto FC, they have skyrocketed in the last decade. And obviously, I mean, something's only as valuable as what someone is willing to pay for it at a time you're willing to sell it. But if MLSE decided to sell the Raptors, they could for sure get umpteen $1 billion, maybe $2 billion, whatever. I don't know the exact number that's in the valuation, but it's worth massively more than they paid for it. TFC is the same thing. The Leafs, of course, they're worth more than $1 billion. And that value just keeps growing. And the Argonauts, like, it's not happening, right? That you couldn't sell that Argonaut franchise for $10 million. You couldn't sell it, I don't think, for $5 million. Can it be grown? I think potentially, yes. But I saw the XFL thing as a potential lifeline. I thought, double the size of the league. One of the problems Canadian Football League has is it's too small. 9 teams is just not enough. Every other major sport has 30, 32 teams, tons of games every week. You don't see the same teams week after week. There's way more things you can bet on, and now betting's going to become bigger and bigger. Now you got this 19 league with only 4 games per week. So to me, if they could have doubled in size, if it could have been a CFL XFL collaboration with 9 teams in Canada, 9 teams in the US, play a certain amount of crossover schedule, mostly keep within your country. So you'd still get lots of games for the Argonauts against all the other 8 Canadian teams, and they get the rivalry games with Hamilton and so on. And my vision for it was you end up with the Grey Cup game to celebrate the Canadian Championship, and at the same weekend there's a championship game happening south of the border to celebrate the American Championship, and then the week after that the 2 teams meet for the combined leagues championship. I thought that could have all worked, and you wrap it up by Labor Day, so you're not going up against the NFL. I was a lone voice on this, I think. I mean, most fans thought the whole idea was stupid, that the XFL is just a failed venture and we don't want to be playing football in April and May against hockey playoffs and all that stuff. And there's lots of arguments to be made for all that. But I looked at it as a thing that could actually work. And I mean, I'm selfish. I'm an Argo fan. I've been an Argo fan since 1968, and I love going to see my team play, and I love watching them play on TV when they're on the road. And if they're gone, I lose something. So I'd rather see the Argos play in a combined CFL and XFL than have no Argos at all. And I'm worried that we're heading in the direction of no Argos at all if something doesn't change soon. Maybe now, if they get into this idea of sharing revenues across through the league, maybe that is enough of a bridge to get to, maybe more revenue starts coming in from betting. I still think the size of the league is a big impediment. I mean, they had dreams of getting international TV contracts when they went to the global program, and it's tough. There's only 4 games per week, and it's the same teams every week, right? Like, it's just, I don't know. I don't see much hope for expansion in Canada. I mean, I think Halifax is dead. I just, there's no desire from governments to pay for a stadium. And COVID has just killed whatever shred of hope there was for that. So if you were going to expand, you'd have to be looking south. And to me, having something where you're combining with something that might potentially be workable, which is a football league that plays not against the NFL and college football, but in its own time frame, with a figure as big as The Rock, and that's where you get the comparison with John Candy and Gretzky and the Rocket. Maybe it could have worked. I was willing to give it a try. In fact, I was eager to see it happen. But it looks like it's not, although I don't think it's completely dead. I still think behind the scenes there may be discussions taking place.
Yeah. Like you, I never want to see this team disappear. And I've long advocated for something like a 1991 season. Like, I feel like we need something like that, or just even the potential for growth again. I'm also a TFC fan, and a big joy of watching the MLS is, number one, the growth. It's constantly adding 1 or 2 teams every year. And when TFC came in 2007, I was a day one fan. Back then, the MLS still wasn't quite there with the quality of play and everything, but, over time, they kept building. I've sort of felt the CFL sort of stayed status quo. It's more stable than it was perhaps when I was a baby, but I don't see that it's growing, and instead it's slowly atrophying over time, where you could do something like MLS has the designated player rule. TFC was doing miserable attendance-wise last year, much like the Argos were, but they've just got that hypothetical Rocket Ishmael shot in the arm. They just signed Lorenzo Insigne for 11.5 million euros. He makes more money than Austin Matthews.
Yeah, but I think the reason that MLSE is willing to do that, though, is because of what I talked earlier about, the franchise value. Like, they're not clearly, the TFC is not going to turn a profit in 2022. I mean, there's no way, even if they fill that building, what is it, 19 times or 18 times per season, whatever the number of games they play. I think they play 38 game schedule, so it's 19 games or whatever. If they fill that, sell it out for 19 games, it's still not going to pay a guy who's making $17 million. But if it builds the value of the enterprise, and I think MLS is growing in enterprise value. Some people think the whole thing's a Ponzi scheme and it's eventually going to collapse. I'm not one of those that buys it. I used to think that was true, but the thing is, soccer is growing worldwide. And nobody paid any attention to soccer in 2005 in North America. Now you got really hardcore fan bases in a hell of a lot of places, and it's not just fan bases of TFC and Real Salt Lake or all those other teams in the MLS. You got people that are passionately following Manchester United and Liverpool and Real Madrid and PSG and places like that. And of course, we've now seen that Canada is producing world-class soccer players, and it looks like we're going to be in the World Cup this year. And so the interest in soccer is going to keep growing. And so it's looking like it might be a pretty smart bet. The ones, I think MLSE paid like $10 million for TFC. They're worth way more than, if they sold that right now, they could get hundreds of millions of dollars for that franchise. So that's a pretty smart investment by MLSE. Can you say the same about the Argonauts? The trouble is, I don't think you can. If you were to go out and sign a big name American star and pay him, even if you paid him, you're not going to pay him 60 million, but even if you paid him 10 million or 15 or 20 million, what's the potential to get payback for that down the road? With a 9-team league playing only in Canada, I don't think there is potential for that. That's why I think MLSE was pushing for, let's get LA and New York into this league, and let's think outside the box. Let's give up on trying to compete against the NFL. It's a juggernaut that no one's ever going to defeat. But if you play May to September or April to September, there might be year-round interest in football. And so, that's where I think the difference is. I don't think MLSE looks at the Argos as having any potential to expand the enterprise value in the structure that they're in now. So will they keep it going, out of a sense of philanthropic duty? Maybe, especially if there's some revenue sharing within the league, and so it's the revenues and expenses are evened out a little bit. Maybe they've got a plan in mind that at some point they want an NFL franchise, and the only way they're going to do that is to not kill the Canadian football franchise in this market. Who knows? But I don't think we're going to see a replication of 1991. I'm afraid. I don't think we're ever going to see a marquee player come into this league unless the league becomes a whole lot bigger. And the only way it becomes a whole lot bigger is to get into the US somehow. And to me, that's an alignment with an existing league. Well, it'd be silly to call the XFL an existing league. It doesn't exist in any sense except name at the moment. But if the XFL were to go, or the USFL, which is starting up in a few weeks, if those were to become a going concern that could work and gets broadcast money in and betting money in, maybe you can link in somehow. And then if you're staying away from the NFL, maybe it works.
Yeah, I mean, it makes perfect business sense to me in the sense that MLSE has this property. They've had it for 4 years now. 4 years now, I think.
Yeah, since the end of the 2017 season, I think, or the end of 2016. So it's 4 or 5 years, yeah.
Right, and even before that, they had Larry Tannenbaum and Kilmer Sports running things, so they kind of already had a hand in things. So they've tried some stuff at this point, and it's clearly not getting the result that they want. So it makes total sense that they would want to explore these different avenues, like expanding down south or merging with another league.
Now, to be fair, you can make a case that they haven't done enough, and a lot of people do make that case. It's a common refrain heard across the league. You got to market better. You're not doing any marketing. Well, they have done a lot of marketing in various ways since the move to BMO. First, it was the Tannenbaum Bell Group, then it was MLSE. They've done various things. And everything that they've done hasn't seen results. So either they're doing everything wrong, or the market is just intractable. The Canadian Football League. My worry is that Canadian football is not going to ever again be considered cool in this giant market, which has a million other options for people to spend their money on. You don't have to be embraced by the entire market to be successful. All you need is 20,000 people willing to go 10 times a year. And get good TV audiences, which they still do, and it can be maybe even break even or turn a profit potentially. But even getting to that 20,000 or 22,000 people hurdle has been really challenging. There may still be more things that can be done. Maybe pricing has to be looked at. Maybe they can do more outreach. Maybe they can hire more ticket salespeople. Who knows what? There is a sense that some people have, and I don't know that it's true, but there's a sense some people have that MLSE looks at the Argos as a thing to just not pay any attention to, and that Bill Manning spends all his efforts focusing on TFC and very few of his efforts focusing on the Argonauts. That may or may not be true. I don't know. I know they've got executives, including Manning, who do work on it. And I mean, it would obviously be in Bill Manning's best interest to suddenly turn things around with the Argonauts. He's gonna, his performance review would presumably be a good one if he turned a money losing venture into a break even or for profit venture. Right. But he may also be at the point where he's saying, like, everything we're doing is just not working. This market no longer cares about it. And if that's true, it's based on 40 years of things going wrong in this market, right? I mean, it's 40 years of either bad ownership or brief blips up followed by collapses. 40 years where the league itself has often seemed to be teetering on the brink of collapse, and that doesn't help when you've got the Ottawa Rough Riders declaring bankruptcy in 1991, and you've got Murray Pezim, going to jail after being the owner of the BC Lions. Maybe Murray didn't go to jail, but he certainly fell into disrepute. You had people like Larry Rickman owning the Calgary Stampeders, and there's been a lot of the Ottawa Rough Riders folded, then the Ottawa Renegades folded. There's been a lot of things that have gone wrong for this league in the past 40 years. So if you were to go back over the press clippings, and believe me, I've got most of them in my basement, there's tons and tons of stories about the potential demise of Canadian football, or things that if you add them all up, they look like this is not a going concern. So that hasn't helped with the market. At the same time, the Blue Jays came in, and suddenly the New York Yankees are coming to town. And then the Blue Jays became very successful, and they won 2 World Series. And so it's like the world, the sporting eyes of North America are focused in on Toronto. It doesn't matter how the nobody in San Antonio or California cares about the Argonauts. Then you had the Raptors arrive, and again you're playing in a global sport, basketball, at the highest level, the NBA. You always had the Leafs playing at the highest level of hockey. And now you've got soccer where they're not playing at the highest level, but they're starting to get marquee names. I mean, Insigne is going to be a good player, apparently. I've never seen him play. I guess maybe I saw him in the World Cup. If I assume he played at some point in the Euro for Italy or whatever. But
yes, he won the Euro final. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I can't speak to how good he is, but I assume if they're paying him that kind of money, they expect him to be really good. And so, you've got the sense of all these other sports are kind of, if not worldwide interest, then certainly broader interest than just in Canada. And there's worldwide interest in the NFL and humongous interest in the United States and the NFL and college football. And then you got this little Canadian Football League playing up there, playing its own rules and its own brand of football. And nobody outside of Canada cares about it. And Toronto, for better or worse, looks at itself as a world-class city and wants to be part of world-class ventures. They really cared. Toronto cared for decades that the CN Tower was the world's tallest freestanding structure. Like, who cares? But Toronto did. And so, Toronto thinks we need the Yankees and the Los Angeles Lakers and Chicago Bulls coming to town. And do we really care about the Saskatchewan Roughriders coming to town? No. And so I just don't know how you solve that problem without growing somehow. You think about it, the CFL's got 9 teams. They've got right now, the name of the Ottawa franchise has changed, and it's been 3 different teams over the years. But we're in the 9 cities we were in 1954. How many teams were in Major League Baseball in 1954? How many were in the NFL? How many were in the NBA? A lot fewer than are there now. The 60s and 70s were the expansion era, and it's continued into the 80s and 90s. All those leagues are now 32 or so teams. CFL still 9. It worked great when the original 6, the CFL had 9 teams, and hockey had the original 6, and there was no basketball and there was no baseball. Well, guess what? Now there's basketball, baseball, and hockey's got 32. So it's a challenge, right?
Yeah. Wow. You hit on a lot there. Then it sort of hits on a lot of the themes we've been talking about. Now, I turned 30 yesterday, and sadly, that makes me a young Argo fan. In high school, I was not only the only Argo fan, I was probably the only CFL fan. And sort of what you were mentioning about the size of the league, a lot of older people, including my dad, always say, I love that the league is only 9 teams. I can follow everything. The issue is we live in a digital world now where everything's at your fingertips. Once I've gone through all 9 teams news for the day on Reddit, it's done. Whereas with the leagues with 32 or even 20 teams like the Premier League, you have enough there to cover to constantly fill that 24/7 void.
And fantasy, right? I mean, it's hard to get enthusiastic about fantasy football. It's nothing that I'm ever going to participate in, but younger people for sure love to do fantasy stuff. And when you've got 32 teams and you can, there's say 64 potential running backs for you to dress or whatever. That's way different than what you've got in Canadian football. So it's a challenge. And, the CFL's tried to sort of make itself a bit more of a year-round news thing. That's one thing the NFL does incredibly well, right? They are year-round news. There's maybe 1 month sort of after the draft and before camp starts when everybody kind of takes a holiday, but otherwise it's an 11-month a year thing. As soon as the Super Bowl's played, everybody starts focusing on free agency and the draft, and they spend weeks and weeks and weeks speculating and talking about that stuff, and then it all happens and that gets people talking about it, and then you have that month off and then camp starts and everybody's back talking about it. So the CFL's tried that. I mean, they have a free agency period, and they've pumped out a lot of content on CFL.ca about looming free agents and so on, and teams have been making a lot of announcements about re-signing guys and so on. But it does kind of go to sleep far more than every other league does, and it's got a longer off season than every other league basically.
Yeah, and that's partially why I'm doing this, because I want to kind of fill that void and provide some content, because that's what's seriously lacking. And as you mentioned, there's more stuff than ever before. So people are easily distracted, and if you're not constantly in their face, they're going to go to the Raptors or the Blue Jays or somewhere else. And with regards to the marketing, it's gotten better. Like, it has gotten a lot better, especially with regards to the social media stuff. More so on a team.
Social media team is fantastic.
Yes, but my problem was, and this has been sort of my thing my entire life, is I've always felt like they were always 5 years behind. Like, it took them too long to get on Facebook. Took us, the Reddit people, yelling at the league for them to get a TikTok. So, like, they're all things that sort of hurt you in the end. And, is it sustainable? And again, with sort of the public perception, because I think that's the key here, is the public perception is the most damaging thing to the league. You go out on the street in Toronto and you bring up the CFL, and there's a good chance somebody's gonna scoff at you or go CFL
or say, "What's that?" I mean, that's this, and particularly among younger people. I mean, that's where you really need to be building your next generation of fans. Is you got to get the teenagers who become the people in their 20s and 30s, and they've got to think it's cool to want to do it. And one of the problems I think the league has is that the product itself is not as cool as it used to be. I mean, I hate to sound like grandpa yelling at clouds, but, in the 1980s and into the 1990s, the entertainment spectacle of Canadian football games was superb. I mean, you could not accuse the league of being a boring product. You could accuse the league of being a boring product now. Things have changed. The rules have changed. The rosters have gotten bigger. And it's not as entertaining as it used to be. And it's not, sadly, as consistently entertaining as the NFL is. Now, people say, yeah, but that's because there's 16 games every week in the NFL, and there's a whole lot of dogs in there, but we only ever see the good games. And, there's an element of truth to that, because we don't see all 16 games unless you've got the DAZN package. But no one can watch all 16 games when 12 of them are all being played at the same time, sort of thing. But we don't have, I mean, I would say, in 1991, 1990, 91, maybe 3/4 of CFL games were spectacularly entertaining. Like 3 out of every 4 every week would be amazing games. Now it might be 1 out of every 4, and some weeks it's none out of every 4. And at the same time, this is happening. People are tuning into the games that are shown in Canada, and they're seeing Patrick Mahomes work his magic, and Josh Allen and Joe Burrow and all these up and coming great young players and quarterbacks and receivers. The NFL has stolen Canadian football style. They throw the ball way more than they run it now. They use spread offenses. They use multiple receiver sets. They stole everything from John Huffnagel and Mouse Davis, basically. And because they pay so much, they get the best athletes, and they're no longer prejudiced against black quarterbacks or small quarterbacks. So the kind of guys that we used to get 30, 40 years ago now go to the NFL and are stars. So you take all those factors, and it's like, wow, like you can't make a legitimate case to somebody in a high school that the CFL is way cooler than the NFL, dude. like you need to be able to make that case, I think. And that's again where I thought the XFL thing might have worked. I was not only in favor of like let's blend the leagues and go together, but let's change the rules. Let's make it so it's really exciting and really weird. Like add wrinkles that kids are going to go, holy crap, is that ever cool? Like, I don't know, two forward passes on a same play or whatever. I don't know what the changes would be, but do something where people are going to go, oh my God, this is so entertaining. It's so much fun. Because that's what they need. And even though and I know from going to BMO, when you're at a game, it's incredibly fun. There's nothing like being at a CFL game, even if it's not that great of a game or that high scoring of a game, it's still really entertaining. But watching it on TV, if it's a whole lot of punting and a whole lot of 2-and-outs and a whole lot of, quarterbacks missing their receivers, it starts to wear thin, and it's the defense has completely taken over. The way teams utilize their personnel has become totally skewed towards defense. Everybody plays the same offensive system, so there's no variety, no differences to focus on, and everybody plays the same defensive systems, and the defensive systems are beating the offensive systems. So they really do need to be looking at changing the rules, in my opinion. I'd like to see some pretty radical things tried. The idea of four downs got floated. It wasn't floated directly by the league, but I'm sure some people in the league are talking about that. I don't think that's going to happen. But they do need to have no sacred cows. Let's consider everything we can, because we have to go back, like, to make it so that it was like it was in 1990 or 91, where anybody who was just purely rational and looked at both leagues would say they may pay more money in the US, they may have bigger name players, they have more teams, but the Canadian game is more entertaining than the American game. We can't say that now, I'm afraid.
No, and I'm inclined to agree. Also, just because we've seen our game drift closer to their game too. Like, especially with the size of the ball. I remember our balls are bigger being such a huge successful thing. The balls are identical now. As of, I think it was 2019, the balls are exactly identical.
Yeah,
So,
I don't see that particular problem as that particular change as being a problem, because it was designed to make the ball easier to throw, and I think it did. If you ever held an old Spalding J5V, those things are fat balloons. I don't know how any quarterback threw them back in the day, but it's more the case where the CFL has adopted NFL strategies in terms of the size of the coaching staffs and the approach that is taken on offense and defense. They've gone away from some of the things that made the CFL really interesting and entertaining, and they do what they see down south. They load the box and try to have endless piles of fresh pass rushers to go in and overwhelm these offensive linemen who never get a breather, and it works. You get a whole lot of sacks and a whole lot of pressure and a whole lot of 3-yard check down passes. That's a function, I think, of the fact that coaching has become very influenced by what's being done in the U.S. But unfortunately, it's funny. I think you can make a case that in U.S. college football in particular, there's a whole lot of varieties of offensive strategies, and a lot of people are really trying to do innovative, high-powered things. And we're not seeing that up here. And I don't understand why. I do understand part of it. Part of it is the rosters and the way that the personnel are being deployed. And a big part of it is the way that they changed the clock rule to allow teams to change their personnel. And it means we don't get as many plays per game as we used to have. I've got tons and tons of games on they were all on VHS tape when I taped them years and years ago. They're now all digitized. And I can put on a game from 1982 or 1991 and watch it, and I've got a 30-second skip feature on my DVR or my DVD recorder. And so I watch a play, the whistle blows, I skip ahead 30 seconds, the next play is already underway. Now you do that and you're still 10 seconds before the ball is snapped, because the refs didn't start the 20-second clock until all the personnel was changed. We get 45 to 55 plays per game by each CFL team now. And we used to get 55 to 65. So that's a difference between 10 and 20 plays per game, offensive plays per game. How's that good?
yeah, no, I've noticed the same thing. And to the point where, when I was way younger, I used to make fun of the NFL for their 40-second play clock and how we had the 20-second one and you got more plays in. And then they did that change. And what I noticed is sometimes it takes longer than 40 seconds to get a play off because it takes.
Well, I've watched it in the stadium. I've listened to the whistle and I've looked at the clock in the stadium, and you get 45 seconds can tick down before the next snap. It's just wasted run on time. That 40-second clock it works really well. What I want the CFL to do is go to something like, I mean, in my wildest dreams, a 25-second clock, but realistically a 30-second clock that starts the moment the ball is blown dead. So you got 30 seconds, you make whatever changes you want to make, and we're going to move those sticks and all that stuff's going to happen, but it's going to take no more than 30 seconds. It'll force teams out of some defensive situation substitutions, and it'll force teams to get it to a faster tempo. And we're going to get more plays per game. And who wouldn't want more plays per game? You go to a game to watch plays. You know, it drives me crazy when I look at the stat sheets and I see, you know, this team ran 45 plays and this team ran 47 plays. I used to look at those stat sheets a lot in the 1980s when they were publishing them. The box would be published in the newspaper the next day, and I would see, you know, Condredge Holloway threw 37 passes and the Argos ran 35 times or whatever the numbers are. It was way higher back then. Like it just was. I'd love to actually do a deep dive and really prove that by looking at, say, 1991 and 2001, 2011, 2021. Someday I may actually take that on as a research project and count the number of offensive plays per game over a 10-year span for over 4 decades. I know the number is going to be a lot fewer now than it used to be. And that's just waste of time. And they run the clock during converts. I mean, that is insane.
Yeah.
You know, that's just totally dead time.
Yeah, that's homework that we're going to give for everybody today that's watching. So next time you're watching a game, have a stopwatch there and just press it every time there's a break in between play, and then figure out the average play clock, I guess.
Yeah, it's a lot more than 20 seconds, that's for sure.
Yeah.
Well, anyways, Paul, this was a great chat. Thanks for coming on. Really appreciate your time. This was great. I encourage everybody to go get Paul's book, You're the Rocket. There it is. Go get it at your local bookstore for this phenomenal story of the 1991 Toronto Argonauts.
Well, thank you so much. I appreciate that. I hope people that pick up the book find that it does justice to an amazing story. I really felt an obligation to do a great job on the book because it is an incredible story. It's the most amazing season we're ever going to have in the history of the Argonauts. We've had lots of joy since '91, and hopefully we're going to have more even this early as this year. But 91 had so many special elements to it. It took me a long time to write it because it's a big story, but I hope everybody that picks it up enjoys it. And anybody can reach out to me. I'm on Twitter at PXW13. Look me up. Find me at the stadium during the games. I sit in the last row of section 124. Always happy to meet Argo fanatics. So thank you very much for having me. I really appreciate it.
All right. Thanks a lot, Paul. You have a great day. Go Argos.
Argos.
Argos. All right.
All right.
Have a good one.
Okay, thanks. That was good.
Kicking off at the 35 with the wind at his back again. Tim White.
All right, everybody. Welcome back to OurCFL. I'm here with a very special guest today. He's very near and dear to my heart. His voice always brings joy to me. We're here with Mr. Adam Gosse today. Adam, how are you?
Have it any better? I'd be a Blue Bombers fan right now.
Are you sure you want to be a Blue Bombers fan?
No, maybe just for about 5 minutes in mid-December there, but no, yeah. I'm quite happy with 17 rings. Thank you very much.
I was at the Grey Cup and I was sitting with a bunch of Bomber fans, and of course I was cheering for the Bombers because I can't cheer for the Hamilton. I'm sorry, I can't do it. But I got creative. I started saying Bombers.
I'm okay with that. I mean, look, it's in our blood. I mean, if the situation was reversed, would they cheer for us? I don't think so.
Absolutely not. Absolutely not. All right, now I'm going to fire right into it. For those of you who don't know you, could you tell us what you do for the Argonauts?
I am the public address announcer for the Argonauts. I'm responsible for the in-stadium announcing, so that's housekeeping duties, promotional reads, and of course recapping the on-field play, down and distance, ball carrier, tackler, and touchdowns. Hopefully a lot of them.
Now, how did you get into this?
Interesting story. So yeah, I kind of went through I like to call it, I went through the back door. A little unorthodox approach compared to a normal path of being educated or taking courses or working through that route. I signed on with the Argonauts in the early 2000s as an unpaid volunteer, the Double Blue Crew. And when they took a look at my resume and knew that I had a football pedigree, because I had grown up playing football, they threw me in the press box to be the spotter for the announcer at the time, who was John Gonzo Mark of radio fame. Now he's on radio in Ottawa, I believe. So I was Gonzo's spotter for a little while he was on the microphone, before the Argos switched gears and Mark Chambers took over. Now, Mark Chambers is a name from the past. Mark Chambers was the voice of the Argonauts in the 90s, especially during the 91 season, and we can all remember how that went down. So Mark was a longtime radio voice. He was a teacher at Humber College in broadcasting. He was a voiceover professional, and of course, he was the voice of the Argos. So it was a privilege to be his spotter. Mark ended up falling ill. He took ill to colon cancer, and he passed away in May of 2008. So I was his spotter for a few years, but he would also have me work the microphone on occasion, handling some different things. He was very comfortable sharing and getting everyone involved, and the team was happy for me to do so as well. And of course, I discovered that I had a voice. I could do this, but more accurately, I can read. So if you can read, you can announce. It has less to do with your voice and more for being able to read a script front to back perfectly. So I could do that. So anyway, when Mark passed away, the team said, we'd like you to take over, and I did. But I only had the full-time season in 2008 under my belt before my day job wanted to move me out to British Columbia.
Mm-hmm.
So I couldn't say no to that. So I was out there for 5 years, moved back to Ontario in 2014, became a fan like you, slumming it in the seats, enjoying adult beverages and hooting and hollering with the best of them, until the opportunity came along again after Don Landry stepped away for me to return to the press box and the announcer's booth. I said, absolutely. And away we went.
It's such a fascinating journey because it's rather unorthodox in the sense that you didn't really have that broadcast or sort of PA background before. You just sort of got your foot in the door and sort of worked your way wherever the Argos sort of needed you in a sense. And look at you now.
I'm very grateful for the opportunities that the Argos have afforded me. I do not take them lightly. In this industry, you take nothing for granted because it could all come crashing down tomorrow. So I'm super excited and grateful to do it. I'm honored to do it, and it's a lot of fun. I've met some amazing people along the way. I just name dropped a couple, and you can't help but to soak a little up from these individuals, right? These absolute pros, the type of people that did do it for a living, that did get educated and are true professionals in every sense. You just can't help but to be a sponge and learn a little bit along the way.
Now, because you're so involved, have you had any sort of starstruck moments? Is there anybody you met in the hallway that you're just like, oh God, I don't want to give a bad
Every day, my
impression?
friend. Every day, my friend. His name is Michael Pinball Clemens, and every time I cross paths with that individual, my heart just sings. It's guys like Mike are the reason you want to play football. You want to be around a team like the Argonauts, and but in all seriousness, it's you. As long as you remain humble, I try to remain as humble as possible. You'll never be disappointed, and as long as you're open-minded, you're going to meet some pretty incredible people. You know what? Even the people that you've never heard of have something to share. I'll cross paths with some of the media guys, some of the announcers from teams across the country, and I'll try to spend a few minutes with them, just having a chat. And everybody's got something to say. Everybody's an expert in something. So it's I just like to meet them and hear their story.
Now, I remember you a few years ago, you would sit in the south end zone and you'd have a drum and you'd be going nuts on that drum and you got everybody fired up and I loved it. And that's what I was going to ask. Do you ever miss it?
I do miss the drum. I miss the drum, Josh. I miss the atmosphere. I mean, one thing I've tried to make a bigger commitment these days is seeing the Argos on the road, because I miss being in that atmosphere with my friends, having a drink, having some food, just sitting and watching football. I mean, I get to watch every Argo home game. I got the best seats in the house, of course, but it's a little different. I can't release the way that we naturally do as fans, right? So I do miss it. I miss it. I miss being with the Oars, Roy Lockney, my boy Roy there in section 114. I miss my buddy Greg. I miss Fluffy. I miss all those cats. It's a great bunch of people. It's a great place to watch a game. I mean, there's no bad seat in BMO. But yeah, I miss it. I miss banging the drum and making noise and contributing in that regard. And one day, you know what? I mean, you know how this works. I'll probably be back there at some point doing that. But for now, I'm going to enjoy this while I can.
Exactly. Make the most of your opportunities while you have it because, hey, it might not always be here and you can always come back as a fan. It's not too hard to hop online, buy a ticket, and come on down to BMO Field. I guess the next thing I would shift to, it's a little bit more serious, I guess. What do you see for the Argos going forward in these next few months, more so the off season?
I mean, it's no secret. The Argos are always struggling to keep their corner of the sports landscape. A lot of different owners, a lot of different managers and marketing people have tried different strategies. Some have worked, some not so much. This version of the Argonauts, I believe, feels the key is giving the sports fans of Toronto a consistent competitive product. I think if you look at, well, maybe not the Leafs, they're probably the enigma, but if you look at the Raptors, if you look at TFC, if you look at a typical Toronto team, even the Blue Jays, the average Toronto sports fan wants a winner. Maybe not a championship every year, but you want to be able to show up at a sporting event with the good odds that you're going to take home a W. It's going to make that atmosphere that much more enjoyable. And I think that's what the MLSE version of the Argos wants to do. They want to continue to build a team that's going to compete for a championship day in and day out. I've talked about this with a few folks before. One thing the Argonauts have not had is a consistent winner. Yes, we've had the championships, but they've typically been followed up with duds. And even the championships that the team has won were in years where the team was not particularly good. We're talking about Grey Cups in 2004, the team was 10-8. In 2012, they were 9-9. In 2017, they were 9-9. These weren't juggernaut football teams. These were teams that kind of eased their way into the playoffs and stole a championship. Now,
yes,
works for us, of course. For those of us who are sitting in the stands, these are dream seasons. But it's not what compels sports fans to want to show up, because it almost feels like it's lucky. So it's a long way of saying for the next few months, I think you're going to see Pinball and his staff focused on building a team that they believe will compete for a championship. There really is no rebuilding years or off years in the CFL. You can turn around a team and win a championship just like that. Now, we were whisper close last season. Of course, we were outplayed by a hungry Tiger Cat team in the Eastern Final. And I think if you use that as the barometer, I think you've got a good base. This team's got a great foundation. I just think we're only a couple pieces away from putting us over the top.
So those pieces, what do you think those pieces are?
Well, I think it starts at the top. I think you need a quarterback. And Pinball has gone on record in the past few weeks saying that they are attempting to re-sign McLeod Bethel Thompson. I don't know if it was a COVID situation or combined with the fact that the players had so much time off during the 2020 cancellation, but I felt the quarterback play across the league took a step back last year. I think you really need to solidify that position because it seems to be slim pickings going into free agency this season or this year, and in just a couple weeks actually. So I think you've got to identify who's going to be throwing the ball now. Outside of that, I think you need to take a look at your offensive line. I think it was no secret that when the Argos struggled last season, it was because of subpar offensive line play. The Argos do have some horses on that offensive line, some studs that they can work with. But I think we could all agree that there is some improvement needed. I think we've got the defense that can win us ball games. The defense was fantastic. They sacked the quarterback. They earned a lot of turnovers. But we'll see. There's been some obviously changes in the coaching staff, so that's something to keep an eye on. But I thought our offensive moved the ball well enough to complement the strong defense and special teams. We can't have this conversation without talking about Boris Beatty. Having him back in the fold is huge for this football team. You could probably pinpoint at least 3 football games that Boris Beatty wins on his own. So that was huge. So we're going to see. I mean, at this point in the season, like you, Josh, I'm a fan like you. I'm just sitting back with my bowl of popcorn and I'm watching it all unfold.
Yeah, you never know who could come to us, right? I mean, that's the magic of the CFL offseason. You never know what's going to happen. Okay, Adam. Well, thank you very much for your time. I really appreciate you coming on, spending some time with me here.
Appreciate that, Josh. Just want to give you a shout out. You and I have never really met face to face, but I see your passion from an arm's length, and I want to say I really admire it. I love what you do for this team and for the CFL. So keep up the great work, brother.
Thanks. I hope my flag doesn't obstruct your view too much.
Absolutely.
But hey, it's a good obstruction, right?
Appreciate you having me, man. Yeah, enjoy this new chapter. I'll be keeping in tune for sure. Have fun. We'll chat soon.
Thank you. You have a great night, Adam.
You too. Take care.
All right. Thank you very much to our special guests once again for taking the time out of their busy days to come talk with us. Before we leave, I have to do the prize draw for this lovely Argos jersey from 2013, retro throwback. Unworn, all the tags still on it. This contest was open to Reddit and Twitter users. Now, I know not everybody is a Argo fan, so if you're not an Argo fan, I'll get in touch with you and we'll find some sort of other arrangement. So yeah, let's pull the name. Give this a good swish around here, and we have Bazooka Knight 1. Congratulations, Bazooka Knight 1. You've won the Argos jersey. I'll get in touch with you and enjoy. Thank you very much for watching, everybody, and I'll see you soon.